May 11th, 1940. About 15 kilometers north of the town of Sedan in Belgium runs the Semois River, a natural barrier that shields the French lines from the north. It's also the last real terrain hiccup between the Germans and Sedan, so French troops take up positions there and prepare themselves for the fight. That fight does not last long though, because by the end of today, the Germans will be across the Semois and headed straight for Sedan. I'm Indy Neidell, and welcome to our World War II mini-series 10 Days in Sedan, where we cover the German thrust through the Ardennes, the rage of the Reich, and the new confrontation between old enemies at Sedan, the crucible where the fate of the Axis and Allies converge. Join me as we explore the course of the battle and its aftermath. Let's jump straight back into the action and see how the Panzers are getting on today. Panzer Group Kleist continues its advance through the Ardennes, with the 3 divisions of Heinz Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps leading the way. Yesterday, Guderian's tanks, armored cars, and motorized infantry fought their way through Luxembourg and into Belgium, clashing with Belgian and French forces at Martelange, Boudange, and Arlon. Resistance was stiff in places, but by the evening, the Germans had pushed deep into the Ardennes. But the advance was not at all going to plan. And, as of nightfall, Guderian was running at least 6 hours behind schedule, and the leading units of his lead division, the 1st Panzer Division, had failed in their objective of taking the town of Neufchâteau. Now this morning, the 1st Panzer Division has its panzers moved up and ready to attack. Leading the charge is the division's 2nd Panzer Regiment, and they move off around 9:30 a.m. Their orders are not to strike directly at Neufchâteau though. Instead, they aim to outflank the town from the south. Soon, they break through the main line of resistance at Coustemont at 10:30. Then, instead of wheeling north, the regiment does something unconventional and continues advancing west, leaving its flanks exposed and pushing deep into enemy territory, ending up in the French rear behind Neufchâteau. On the 10th of May, fate seemed to have been against the 1st Panzer Division, but in this day, it had good luck again and again. The advance led through a gap between 2 loosely connected French delaying formations. The reinforced 11th Cuirassier Dragoon Regiment in the area around Neufchâteau, and the reinforced 60th Reconnaissance Battalion positioned to the south thereof. That push directly hit the nerve center of the French defense, the village of Petit-Voir, just 4 kilometers to the west of Neufchâteau. At Petit-Voir, the attacking panzers roll over the French artillery park, surprising the gunners. Things are similar at Warmes-Fontaine. Meanwhile, the 1st Panzer Regiment follows in the gap created by its sister unit. Instead of joining the action, the 1st pushes further west still, and by 3 p.m. takes the road junction at Biorge, about 8 kilometers from Neufchâteau. That single action cuts off the main withdrawal route for the French forces still fighting near Neufchâteau. Their path towards Bétry, just 4 kilometers away, is cut. The shock of this rapid outflanking creates chaos among the French, who up until that point have fought bravely and tenaciously. But the prospect of being completely cut off sends them streaming to the rear for safety. This allows the 2nd Panzer Regiment to complete its capture of Petit-Voir. It also means that German infantry following behind are able to take Neufchâteau with little difficulty. In the meantime, at around 2:15 p.m., the 3rd Battalion 1st Rifle Regiment had also driven through that same breach at Coustemont and immediately wheeled to the north to attack Neufchâteau. While the soldiers of that battalion just the day before had to fight bitterly for many hours over Boudange, which numbered only a dozen houses, Neufchâteau, one of the biggest cities in the Ardennes, fell into their hands like a ripe fruit. The city was taken without major resistance at around 3:30 in the afternoon. Next objective is Bouillon, which is close to the Belgian border with France. Taking the town and its 2 bridges would allow the 1st Panzer Division to cross the Semois River in force. The town sits nestled on a little peninsula within a tight bend of the river. Atop a tall rocky massif sits the castle of the Crusader knight Gottfried von Bouillon. The units of the 5th Light Cavalry Division have withdrawn to positions in front of the town after their defeat in the actions further east. The 1st Panzer Battalion then fights for the town in a battle that lasts well into the evening. It's a pretty bold attack, rushing forward to try and take the bridges intact. By 6:30 p.m., they've taken some ground in the town itself, but the French managed to blow up both the northern and the southern bridges. The panzers are supported by the Luftwaffe, and the French supported by heavy 155mm guns firing from 16 kilometers away in Sedan on the Meuse. This, by the way, is the first time the guns positioned on French territory itself have participated in the fighting. By early evening, the Germans have been pushed back and are unable to complete the seizure of the town. This isn't quite the end of the story, though. The impetuous German attack did not fail to impress the French defenders. They overestimated the danger and made a critical mistake. At 9:30 p.m., they voluntarily evacuated Bouillon, the last natural obstacle before Sedan. This withdrawal took place unnoticed by the Germans during a simultaneous artillery barrage. During the night, Bouillon was like a ghost town. On the next morning, the 1st Panzer Division, for the first time in this campaign, carried out a textbook-style attack, but that action was wasted because Bouillon was clear of enemy forces. Before that happens, though, the French make another mistake. Just after midnight, a small German assault team mounts a raid on the little village of Mouzave and seizes a bridge over the Semois. This is actually across the divisional boundary with 2nd Panzer Division, so they have to request permission to go here. But because 2nd Panzer Division is lagging behind, permission is granted. I won't go into a lot of detail about this raid, but it has some pretty significant consequences. It so happened that at Mouzave ran the boundary line between the 2nd Army, whose left wing was formed by the 5th Light Cavalry Division, and the 9th Army, which had employed the 3rd Spahi Brigade on the extreme right wing. The latter was therefore responsible for the town of Mouzave and for the bridge. Because the 3rd Spahi Brigade retreated to the Semois later than the 5th Light Cavalry Division, a gap developed for a short time into which the German assault detachment punched. This chain of unfortunate circumstances, again, led to an overreaction by the commander of the 3rd Spahi Brigade, who, without any contact with his superiors, hastily ordered a retreat. When 2nd Army was informed about the withdrawal of the left-wing neighbor, a crisis mood was triggered because the left wing of the 5th Light Cavalry Division was now hanging in thin air. In the end, the only thing left to do was to withdraw that division also. With these twin defeats at Mouzave and Bouillon, the French defense line along the Semois has basically collapsed. Again, just like in the Ardennes, it's not because of a lack of fighting ability or determination on the part of the French troops. The men have been let down by the battle plan and the decisions of those higher up. All is not well for the Germans, though. While the 1st Panzer Division has made good progress today, the 2nd and 10th Panzer Divisions have no such luck. Today, they have been caught up in the biggest traffic jam so far in European history. Even worse is the situation for Reinhardt's 41st Panzer Corps, who are meant to be following behind Guderian's 19th Corps. In reality, Reinhardt's divisions are still stuck in Luxembourg. Even worse, von Wietersheim's 14th Motorized Corps, which is following behind Reinhardt, has barely left its assembly areas on German soil. This doesn't just mean slower progress than expected. It also means the carefully planned logistical effort to ensure adequate fuel supplies to the panzers is at risk. Worse still, in the Ardennes itself, infantry divisions from neighboring sectors have forced their way across the boundaries and are clogging up the march routes. This is not only because of a breakdown in coordination, it's also because the infantry generals are pretty hostile to the panzer troops. They don't want the tankers to get all the glory. This traffic jam isn't just frustrating, though, it's possibly deadly, with rumors swirling of enemy attacks and friendly fire an ever-present risk. The question then becomes, why don't Allied aircraft exploit this chaos and rain bombs and cannon fire down on the German traffic jam? Well, by now, the Luftwaffe has air superiority over the Ardennes. The Allied air forces are operating in northern France and Belgium, still expecting the main thrust of the offensive to come there, and planning a counteroffensive when it does. The French Air Force boasts some 4,800 aircraft, though barely over 350 of those are operating in Belgium itself. A larger number are in France proper, although a quarter of them are out of action and in need of maintenance. 500 planes of the British RAF have also been sitting ready on the northern front, initially including 6 squadrons of Hurricanes, though by the end of May 10th, that number rose to 10. It's kind of absurd that the Allies are committing so many resources to this gambit in the north, because they really shouldn't be ignorant of the danger moving through the Ardennes. French military planners looked at the possibility of a push through to the Meuse back before the war started and found it would be quite possible. Further warnings also came in March and at the start of this month. On May the 1st, the French military attaché in Bern, Switzerland, reported that the German army would attack sometime between the 8th and 10th, with Sedan as its main point of focus. They have predicted the time and place correctly down to the very day, but to no avail. Allied intelligence yesterday, the 10th, still dismissed the idea as either a feint or a secondary objective. We need to dive back now to yesterday for a second, because I didn't have time to talk about what's been going on in the air. The Luftwaffe prepared to support the attack, but also tried to keep things flexible, unsure how things on the ground would go. Dutch and Belgian airfields have also been a big concern. If things at Sedan don't go well, and the British, French, Dutch, and Belgian air forces continue to operate out of these bases, the industrial heartlands of the Ruhr Valley would be under threat of strategic bombing. So their first order of business was to strike as many airfields as they could as the offensive got underway, to catch as many Allied planes on the ground as possible and cripple their ground organization, as they successfully did in Poland. The first of 2,500 German planes took off in the darkness of the early morning of the 10th, headed for targets in Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. Bombers began pounding their targets 20 minutes after dawn, while fighters achieved aerial superiority over the Ardennes. A wave of 500 Heinkel HE-111s and Dornier 17s flew in and dropped their payloads with little resistance. Another 500 arrived 90 minutes later. The losses for the Belgian and Dutch air forces were enormous. They lost over half their serviceable aircraft by the time this second wave of bombers returned to base. The British and the French fared a little better, though they still took plenty of casualties on the ground. But once they started to get fighter craft up to intercept the bombers, they managed to turn the Germans around. Even so, the bloat of the French command structure and the failures in handling on the ground started to really show themselves, as each French plane only managed 1/4 of the number of missions flown by the average Luftwaffe plane. Right, back to today. Guderian's forces are advancing, albeit more slowly than they hoped. So now is a good time to take a look at the forces that they will be running into as they approach Sedan. The sector around Sedan is the responsibility of Pierre-Paul Charles Gransard's 10th Corps, part of the French Second Army under Charles Hunziker. Now, is this a weak part of the line, as the Germans suspect? Well, yes and no. It depends how you look at it. Hunziker apparently doesn't expect an attack here at Sedan, and as late as May 7th is recorded as saying, "I do not believe the Germans will ever consider attacking in the region of Sedan." This isn't quite the full picture though, because fortifications are still dotted around the sector and overlook the Meuse River, with no fewer than 2 divisions and a fortress regiment deployed in the area. The fortress regiment, the 147th, occupies 8 blockhouses, an artillery casemate, and 46 pillboxes, defending a line which starts around Donchéry, then runs along the Meuse River, except for the indefensible loop near Isch, and ending around Vaudelincourt, facing east towards Balan and Bazeilles. Supporting them and operating behind the line of fortifications, we have the 55th Division. These guys are a reserve B-series division, which is exactly what it sounds like it is. Most of these troops are in their mid-30s. They lack training. They're poorly equipped and commanded compared to the divisions the French are rushing into Belgium. But that's not to say that they're at all useless. They still pack heavy artillery, which has already been deployed and is ready, and they've been on alert since yesterday. Gransard has ordered the reserve 71st Division to join the line southeast of Sedan, slotting in between the 55th and the 3rd North African Division in the Agincourt sector, allowing the 55th to shorten its right flank and concentrate more force in Sedan proper. Sources disagree on exactly when that order was given, but they agree that the division is meant to be in place by May 14th. These are not minor defensive preparations. Minor in comparison to other parts of the Maginot Line, sure, but Hunziker, and especially Army Chief of Staff Maurice Gamelin, believe them to be sufficient. Partly, this is down to the terrain in the sector. The Meuse River is still a formidable natural barrier, even if it's perhaps overvalued by the French. Lines of sight and fire are clear and plentiful, and a weaker force should have a good chance here of holding back a stronger one if they can keep the line intact and prevent crossings, and then pound the bottled up attackers with artillery. We'll see if they can do that in the future, though, because today now comes to an end. The German victories at Bouillon and Mouzave have thrown open the gates to the River Meuse, and tomorrow's action may very well be taking place in sight of Sedan's defenders. So they better be ready. And heck, we better get ready too, because well, a lot could be about to happen over these next hours and days. You know, one man who is not impressed with the defenses and strategy at Sedan is Deputy of the National Assembly Pierre Taittinger. Today, I want to read you this to finish things. His words to Army Chief of Staff Maurice Gamelin, quoted in Karl-Heinz Frieser's The Blitzkrieg legend. In this region, we are entirely too much taken with the idea that the Ardennes woods and the Meuse River will shield Sedan, and we assign entirely too much significance to these natural obstacles. The defenses in this sector are rudimentary, not to say embryonic. This place spells misfortune for our troops. Well, he was certainly correct about the Ardennes. We'll soon see whether he's right about the Meuse as well. Something else Taittinger is correct about is when he said, you ought to join the Time Ghost Army, since it's thanks to the army that we can keep the Time Ghost wheels turning. Okay, he didn't say that, I'm pretty sure. But you should still join the army, and you can do that at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Our Ardennes amigo of the week is Propagandolf the Red. What a name that is. Well, okay, our newly commissioned officers can be found here. Look at them. Are they not fantastic? And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.